In the first shots, we see ancient Earth and an alien standing at the edge of a waterfall. While his fellow aliens were preparing to fly away, the humanoid put a bowl on the ground and pulled out another vessel with liquid from it. The alien drank the black liquid. The flying saucer almost disappeared from view. Suddenly the alien's body began to disintegrate, right down to the DNA. The remains of the alien fell into the waterfall, giving rise to new life. Next events take us far into the future. Archaeologist Elizabeth Shaw discovered something curious and asked a colleague to call Charlie. When Dr. Holloway came to the cave, Elizabeth showed him rock drawings at least 35,000 years old. The drawings depicted ancient people worshipping a giant creature pointing to the stars. This is not the first such discovery discovered by archaeologists. Charlie and Elizabeth held hands. They have no doubt that these creatures want humanity to find them. Further events take us to the year 2093. The crew of the Prometheus spaceship is 17 people. It is already very far from Earth. David is the only one aboard the ship who is awake. He walked into the cryo compartment where Elizabeth Shaw, who like the others is in a state of hibernation. David could see the dreams of Dr. Shaw, who was remembering her childhood and her father. They lived in Africa, Elizabeth's mother having passed away. David studied ancient languages and watched old movies, repeating quotes from characters. Suddenly the ship shook, and the artificial intelligence reported that the destination was reached. David saw through the observation window of the ship a huge planet, but the target was not the planet itself, but its satellite. David later discovered that Meredith Vickers had already awakened from a state of hibernation that had lasted nearly 2.5 years. Vickers told to wake up the rest of the crew. Elizabeth Shaw felt sick, but David assured her that it would soon pass. While the crew ate breakfast and recovered, Vickers saw the ship's Captain Yannick preparing for Christmas. Biologist Milburn tried to get acquainted with geologist Fifield, but the latter made it clear that he was not here for friends, but for money. Soon there was a briefing. No one really knows what they came here for, but some assume it's geo-exploration for terraforming. Vickers greeted the crew members. Her job is to keep an eye on how the others are working. A hologram recording from 2 years ago came on. Peter Wayland, founder of the largest corporation on Earth, announced that David, a member of the team, was practically like a son to him, but he was not human, but an android. Wayland has always been concerned with the question of where humans came from, and he has found those who claim to have found the answers. Elizabeth and Charlie showed the crew images of archaeological finds from all over the world. They all have one thing in common: images of giant creatures calling people to the stars. It's like a map and an invitation. Scientists were able to find a star similar to the Sun using these coordinates. A planet with a satellite, on which life is possible, circles around it. The team members are skeptical, but Elizabeth believes this is where they will find the creators of humanity. The ship Prometheus was preparing to make a landing on the planet LV-223. David invited Elizabeth and Charlie to visit Vickers, who lives in a separate module with an independent life support system. Elizabeth thought it strange that there was a medical module in the compartment with a shunt function, but Vickers asked her not to touch anything. She also made it clear that she didn't believe the engineers existed, unlike Wayland, who was a fanatic. But if Elizabeth and Charlie do manage to find these aliens, they cannot be made contact without the consent of Vickers. David later revealed that he had spent 2 years studying ancient languages, so he would be able to communicate with the engineers, if they existed. The captain and his 2 pilots brought the ship into the atmosphere and made a landing. Apparently, the air here is not suitable for breathing. The crew members see a pyramid-like structure in the distance. Charlie doesn't want to wait until morning and asks the crew to get ready for the mission right away. David also put on a spacesuit to make the others feel more comfortable. The team set off and soon reached the pyramid. It is not yet known whether it is of natural origin or not, but it is definitely hollow. The scientists went inside the pyramid and found themselves in the corridor. Fifield activated special devices to scan the entire interior of the pyramid. A 3-dimensional map began to take shape on Yannick's desk. The air here was absolutely clean and breathable. Neglecting safety precautions, the team members removed their suit helmets. Despite the low temperature, the water in the cave does not freeze. David found some slime-covered buttons and pressed them, activating the hologram. The frightened scientists saw aliens fleeing in fear from someone or something. The team followed the hologram. One of the aliens fought off his group and fell under the door, dying. The astonished scientists realized that they had found their creators. Vickers was as shocked as they were. Fifield panicked, for he had not agreed to such a venture. His specialty is geology, not alien bodies. Fifield intended to return to the ship. Milburn supported him and went with him. Scientists were able to determine the age of the find. Apparently, the alien has been dead for about 2,000 years. David managed to figure out the technology and open the door. Elizabeth immediately saw the head of the humanoid. The scientists found themselves in a hall with a huge number of vases of some kind. No one suspected that there were worms crawling in the ground. This hall passed for a temple or a giant tomb. The frescoes depicted some kind of alien artwork. Meanwhile, David scrutinized the liquid in the vases and concluded that it was organic. The murals on the ceiling began to change. Perhaps it was because of the effect of people on the humidity in the air. A flint storm was approaching, and Yannick ordered the crew to return to the ship. Dr. Shaw and Dr. Ford packed the head, and David took one of the vases. The storm was very close, and the crew headed for the ship. Near the entrance to the main gateway, the backpack with its valuable cargo fell, and Elizabeth returned for it, caught directly in the storm. Charlie tried to help her, but now they were both in the middle of the storm. In the end, David saved the couple. It turned out that Milburn and Fifield still hadn't returned to the ship. They were lost in the pyramid. Until the storm clears, the crew can't go back for them. Shaw and Ford, having sterilized the object, proceeded to examine the head. Vickers came in to observe the process. Soon the scientists realized that it was not an external skeleton, but only a helmet. Having lifted it up, the scientists saw under the suit the face of a humanoid, which looked very much like a human being. The scientists gave a bioelectric pulse to the alien's brain, hoping to convince his nervous system that he was still alive. Suddenly the head began to come to life. There was no way the scientists could prevent it. Vickers ordered the object of study to be urgently covered by a dome. Almost immediately it exploded. It turns out that the gods are mortal after all. In the next scene, we see David talking to some man who was in the hypersleep capsule. As David walked down the corridor, Vickers blocked his path, but he refused to give details of the conversation. Later, the android returned to the lab and opened that very vase. Meanwhile, Shaw and Ford compared the DNA of humans and the engineers and found a genetic code match. David offered Charlie a drink. Dr. Holloway happily agreed, unaware that David had dipped his finger in the glass, putting a drop of the black liquid in it. In the meantime, Milburn and Fifield found a mountain of alien bodies. Yannick contacted them and reported that a mile away the sensor detected some kind of life form. Since the signal was picked up in the west, the scientists headed east. In the evening, Elizabeth tried to find out what happened to the engineers. Perhaps an epidemic had broken out on their planet and wiped everyone out. Charlie wonders why these aliens created them and why they abandoned on Earth. In spite of everything, Elizabeth has not taken off her cross, because it is unknown who created the engineers. Charlie and Elizabeth developed a passion between them. Yannick asked Vickers if she was a robot. The woman was shocked by the question, and she asked the captain to visit her in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Milburn and Fifield came to the very hall with the vases. Suddenly they saw an alien snake-like creature. Fifield was frightened, but Milburn was enthralled by the creature. The scientist reached out his hand to the snake, and it immediately attacked him and wrapped around his arm. When Fifield tried to help his colleague and cut off the snake's tail, acid sprayed into his helmet and melted through it. The snake crawled into Milburn's spacesuit and took his life. The next morning Charlie felt very sick. He looked in the mirror and saw a worm in his eye. The scientists were contacted by Yannick, who reported that the team was to go in search of Milburn and Fifield, who were not in contact. After learning that some life form had been spotted in the pyramid, David became interested. While the team searched for the missing scientists in the pyramid, David went to the coordinates of the supposed life form. Vickers closely monitored all his actions from the camera. Once in the cargo bay, David turned off the camera. There were several alien hypersleep capsules. Charlie was getting worse, but he assured he was fine. The black liquid began to ooze actively from the vases. Soon the team discovered Milburn's body. When she saw Charlie's condition, Elizabeth said they had to return to the ship immediately. There was fuss and panic, and Elizabeth told Vickers that they had to prepare a quarantine, because it might be contagious. David pressed all sorts of buttons and sat down in the pilot's chair. Suddenly holograms of aliens entered the compartment, talking to each other about something. David watched them carefully. A three-dimensional star map lit up the hall. David was in the center of all this beauty, holding a holographic model of the Earth. Soon everything went out. David realized that one of the aliens was still alive and in the hypersleep capsule. The android listened to his breathing and smiled. Charlie was in critical condition, but the ship's gateway was closed. Vickers flatly refused to let Holloway aboard, or the entire crew would risk an alien infection. Charlie understood this too, and after telling Elizabeth that he loved her, began to move towards Vickers. Meredith was forced to use the flamethrower. Elizabeth wakes up in the medical bay. David took off her cross, for it might be infected. After scanning the woman, David realized that she was 3 months pregnant. Elizabeth can't believe it, because it's impossible. But according to David, it's not exactly a normal fetus. Elizabeth insists on removing the fetus, but David says the best solution is to cryopreserve it until they return to Earth. Suddenly Elizabeth felt an intense pain. The android injected her with a sedative and placed her on a horizontal surface. David has seen the woman's dreams and knows that she lost her father under the same circumstances that she lost Charlie. He too contracted a virus. The scientists in the biosuits were about to move Elizabeth to the cryosection, but she seized the moment, knocked them out, and ran to the Vickers module, where there is medical equipment. Elizabeth felt intense pain, but managed to adjust the equipment in the right way. After injecting herself with a painkiller, she lay down in the medical capsule. After diagnosis, the artificial intelligence performed surgery on her and extracted the alien cub. The creepy creature began to wriggle, and terrified Elizabeth climbed out of the capsule, freezing the monster. Meanwhile, Yannick and the crew found Fiefeld near the ship. The man's body had undergone a gruesome metamorphosis, and he attacked the crew members. Yannick was barely able to neutralize the monster. Weakened Elizabeth entered one of the compartments. She was shocked when she realized that Peter Wayland was actually alive and asleep all this time. He is very old and has a few days to live. He wants to use them to meet the last surviving engineer. Wayland hopes the Creator will grant him immortality. Elizabeth thinks this is a bad idea. The engineers are really not at all what they imagine them to be. Shaw insists that they should leave as soon as possible, but Wayland is convinced that they should not back down when they are this close to the answers. Regardless, Elizabeth decided to go as part of the team to meet the engineer. Before Wayland leaves, Vickers decides to talk to him. She believes that the engineer will not grant him immortality. There is no need to fear the end, for it is a natural process. Wayland, however, stuck to his opinion. Vickers understood that this was the last time she would see her father. The team arrived at the pyramid. Elizabeth urged everyone not to remove their helmets, because Charlie could have contracted the virus from the air. But David assured that it wasn't in the air. Yannick realized that there was an alien ship inside the pyramid. Meanwhile, David prepared to wake up the engineer by telling that the aliens were going to leave before the disaster struck. Their goal was Earth, because to create something, you must first destroy it. The alien woke up and was severely disoriented. Without allowing the engineer to recover from the hypersleep, David began to convey to him, in an ancient language, Wayland's wish to become immortal. The engineer did not like this and attacked the android and neutralized several members of the team. Elizabeth managed to escape. Wayland passed away, and Vickers said it was time to return to Earth. The alien was preparing to activate his ship. Like these people, he was going to Earth. While the ship's systems started up, the engineer sat in the pilot's chair. Elizabeth begged the captain not to let the alien ship leave the atmosphere, for then all humanity would end. Though the Prometheus is not a warship, Yannick was determined to do his duty. He dropped the life support module on the planet's surface and told Vickers to leave. The pilots stayed with Yannick. Vickers managed to leave the ship in an escape pod at the last moment, and the Prometheus crashed at full speed into the alien starship, knocking it off course. The ship crashed to the ground. Unlike Vickers, who was right under it, Elizabeth managed to escape. She crawled out from under the ship and headed for the life support module. Hearing strange noises, she picked up the axe. It turned out that her alien cub had grown to an incredible size. Elizabeth was contacted by David and informed that the engineer was coming directly to her. The artificial intelligence notified that the gateway had been breached. The alien entered the module and attacked Elizabeth, but she managed to unlock the door to the medical compartment. The creature entangled the alien with its tentacles, and Elizabeth fled. Lying on the ground, she wept with helplessness. Suddenly David got in touch with her again, saying that there were many ships here. David could have learned astronavigation to fly back to Earth. Elizabeth returned for the broken but functioning android. She put the cross back on without losing her faith. Elizabeth also stated that she did not want to go back to where she came from. She wants to go where the engineers came from. Later, David asked Elizabeth what her goals were. The woman replied that it was important for her to know why the aliens created humanity and wanted to destroy it, but then changed their minds. It is the 1st of January 2094 AD. Elizabeth and David were preparing to go together to the place called Paradise in the Bible.